Excited about this conversation. This guy has done a great job covering Ohio State for a long time. He is the deputy editor and lead Ohio State football beat writer at 11 Warriors. You can find them on Twitter at 11W. You can find him on Twitter at Dan_Hope. He is Dan Hope, and he's kind enough to join us to preview Texas and Ohio State. Dan, thanks so much for the time, man. How are you this morning?
I'm doing good. Well, how are you guys?
Doing fantastic, man.
Doing fantastic. So that set the scene for us a little bit, Dan. I mean, obviously a lot of Longhorn fans will be making their way up to Columbus over the next couple of days. But from the Ohio State side of things, what's the excitement level like for Texas making its first trip to the Shoe in 2 decades?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get much bigger than this to start a season, right? I mean, you got number 1 team in the country coming to town, top 3 matchup. And on top of that, it's a rematch of, I mean, one of the most, epic games that Ohio State has had in a long time. That Cotton Bowl win, obviously, the way it ended, very exciting for Ohio State fans with, Jack Sawyer's scoop and score touchdown. And so, I think Ohio State fans are excited for, a celebration of, that championship and starting a new season. And of course, Texas is going to be coming in looking for revenge, wanting to avenge that loss from last season. So, I think it's going to be a spectacular game on Saturday, and I think there's a ton of excitement here in Columbus for it.
Dan, what would Ohio State be really working on, during the summertime? What are some of the keys that they need to get a little bit better at going into this new season?
Well, obviously, first and foremost, when you have a new quarterback, it's all about breaking in that new quarterback, building cohesion around him on offense. So, Julian Sayin winning that job a couple weeks ago, I think that's number 1 is kind of building that offense around Julian Sayin, getting him comfortable. I mean, this is a guy who was the 3rd string quarterback last year as a freshman, has not played, really any meaningful snaps. And now he's going to go make his first start against Texas. So I think that's probably, number 1, at least for the offense. And then, defensively, you have a new coordinator in Matt Patricia. You have 8 new starters from last year. So you still have Caleb Downs. You still have Sonny Styles. That's huge. But there's so much newness around them, especially, on the defensive line with 4 new starters. You're breaking in a lot of new pieces on that side of the ball, as well as making some schematic tweaks with Matt Patricia.
Yeah, Dan, I kind of want to break down your answer there, starting with Julian Sayin, right? Like maybe an impossible question to answer because, like you said, he hasn't played a whole lot of meaningful snaps. But, with what you have seen from him in his limited time last year, with what you've seen and heard about him this summer, give a little scouting report on Julian Sayin and what type of problems he could bring to the Texas defense.
Well, I think certainly he's a guy who has the tools to be an excellent passer at the collegiate level and beyond. I think he's got a quick release. He's very accurate as a thrower. He's got a strong arm, has some athleticism as well. The biggest questions I think with him going into this game is, how's he going to handle the pass rush, the pressure? We haven't seen him really do that at all because, most of what we've seen from him so far has been in practice when quarterbacks aren't being tackled. And so, I think, how's he going to handle, the pass rush? How's he going to handle just playing in 100,005 people around him with the bright lights? And, he's not the biggest guy. So, if he takes a few hits, how's he going to react to that? But I think, just in terms of being, a natural pocket passer, he has all the tools to be that next first round quarterback from Ohio State. But now he's got to prove he can go do it in live action.
And Dan, from the defensive front, well, with Matt Patricia now as the defensive coordinator, they played pretty good defense last year. Scheme-wise, I know there's a lot of things he can add to it, but do you still see them doing the things that they did last year that was so successful? I mean, it's hard. All of a sudden, the communication gets to be different. You probably kept most of your coaches, everybody's back as a position coach, and that the things that you talked about last year seem to be the things that you still want to talk about this year, just with some new players and little nuances that Matt Patricia can add. But I can't see them changing an awful lot.
I think all of that is correct. Like you said, all the other position coaches on defense are back except for Matt Patricia. So something Ryan Day has said multiple times is, we brought Matt Patricia in to run our defense. They don't want Matt Patricia to come in and completely reinvent the wheel in terms of what they were doing defensively, because like you said, Ohio State had the best defense in the country last year. So they don't need to, completely renovate the way that they play defense. But they do have a lot of new players on that side of the ball. So I think there's some certain things they'll need to adjust just to kind of match their personnel this year. And, I think one of the things that's going to be interesting to see is, do they mix up their fronts a little bit more? Because we've seen them, really throughout the Larry Johnson era, Larry Johnson, their defensive line coach, typically be, a very heavy 4-man front
Right.
kind of team. But will we see them mix things up a little bit more this year? I mean, there was, the comments that were made mid-season last year by Nick Saban about how they should mix things up more. And they did make some kind of more subtle changes to their defense, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we see some more mixing of fronts this year, especially if some of the variety of edge rushers they have. A guy like CJ Hicks, who's a converted linebacker, now playing defensive end. I think we could see a little bit more odd fronts, use of rush linebackers off the edge. I think if you're going to see like visible changes on this defense, I think that's probably the biggest one that I think we could see, but how much of that we'll see, that's really to be determined.
Dan Hope of 11 Warriors joining us here on Bucky and BK. Dan, I want to get to the skill position players on offense. Everybody knows about Jeremiah Smith, maybe the best player in college football, but some pretty significant departures from last year's team, right? Emeka Egbuka, first-round pick in the NFL draft. Both running backs with Henderson and Judkins are off to the NFL. Talk about those running backs. Talk about those receivers who are going to replace those guys. And do you still feel like that is a strength of this Buckeyes roster?
I think in terms of receivers, absolutely. I mean, I think they're still loaded at receiver. With Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate coming back from last year's starting lineup. Brandon Inniss is a guy who looks ready to be a potential breakout player at the slot receiver position. And then they brought in Max Clare at tight end, who's, one of the best tight ends in the country. So I think they're still loaded. I still think, you receivers and you factor tight ends in there. I think Ohio State will have the best receiving core in the country. Running back's a little bit less proven, but I think they should still be good at running back. James Peoples, a guy from the state of Texas that Ohio State's very high on. They also brought in C.J. Donaldson, transfer from West Virginia. They have a freshman, Bo Jackson, who they really like. I would say I would expect a small step back from where they were last year, because I don't know if they have anybody in that running back room this year who's quite as dynamic as TreVeyon Henderson was. But I still think they will have a solid group of running backs.
And what will the Buckeyes have to look out for with Texas besides the quarterback? Because I know that's got to be all the talk in Columbus is Arch Manning, and beware of Arch Manning running, beware of the big arm and just who he is. But what other thoughts would this Ohio State defense have to worry about offensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of, the defense, I think probably the biggest question that I have is going to be that defensive line. How well can they hold the line up the middle against the run, especially at that defensive tackle spot? I think they have what I think is going to be a really good starting tandem of defensive tackles in Caden McDonald and Edric Houston, but the depth behind them's a little bit suspect. I mean, Texas got a guy in Hero Canoe who I think would be on that Ohio State 2 deep if he had stayed at Ohio State. Losing him, not adding any defensive tackles through the transfer portal, has left some questions about that defensive tackle depth. So I think that's going to be one of my bigger questions is, can Texas, get a run game going up the middle? Is that somewhere that they can have success? Obviously, Texas breaking in some new offensive linemen, so that's a bit of a question there too. But, Quintravion Wisner, CJ Baxter, Texas having some effective running backs. Will Ohio State's defensive line with 4 new starters be able to consistently stop the run?
Dan, I've gone into seasons, reading a lot about a lot of different teams over the years. And I don't know if I've ever seen more varying opinions on any one unit on one team than I have with the Ohio State offensive line. I feel like some articles I read, it's like, this could be the best offensive line that Ohio State has had in years. And then some other articles I've read is like, oh, it's kind of a big question with Ohio State up front. And I don't know if they have the horses to replace what they lost last year. Texas has a loaded defense. Longhorn fans are hoping the 2025 Texas defense can resemble the 2024 Ohio State defense. But what's this Ohio State offensive line looking like? Are they polished? Are they ready to go? Or are there still some questions up front on offense?
I think there's quite a bit of optimism about what Ohio State's offensive line can be. I think a lot of that is because of what they were able to do in last year's college football playoff, where, you have an interior offensive line. Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Tegra Shabola. Luke and Carson were not starters for most of last year. Tegra had a very up and down first year as a starter last year, but they played well in the college football playoff. At the very least, they played well enough for Ohio State to go win a national championship with those guys in the middle. So bringing back that whole core of guys with another year of experience, I think generates a lot of optimism, at least on the interior offensive line. I think the question for me would be the tackles, because of the fact that, those guys are less experienced. But, Austin Sierraveld's the guy that Ohio State absolutely loves. Now, he's making the transition from basically being a rotational guard last year to playing left tackle. So you think about a first start at left tackle against Colin Simmons. That's a daunting task. And so we're going to have to see, how does Austin Sierraveld handle that kind of a matchup? But there's a lot of optimism, a lot of positivity surrounding him this offseason. And then, Phillip Daniels is a guy at right tackle that seems like he's really made a move in preseason camp. It's interesting because Ethan Anianwa from Rice is a guy who, really everybody thought when he came in was going to be Ohio State starting left tackle this season. And now it looks like he's probably going to be the sixth man on the offensive line, where he may not even be a starter. And so I think that's partially that they didn't necessarily see what they wanted to see from Ethan Anianwa this preseason, particularly in terms of pass protection. But I also think it has to do with Austin Sierraveld and Phillip Daniels both making a move in preseason camp, both showing that they're ready to be starting tackles for this team. So, there's some questions there, particularly at tackle, just because there's not a ton of experience with those guys. But I do think there's optimism. I think this offensive line is in a better place going into the season than maybe it's been in several recent years at Ohio State.
Dan, how long will it be if things aren't going well enough with a new quarterback and kind of a new play caller? He's been there before. I mean, he's been around, so it's not like he's new at doing this as the offensive coordinator. But will Ryan Day get involved in a hurry if need be, you think? I mean, I know he's involved in play calling anyway. I mean, everything has to go through him. That's kind of the way it goes. You may be able to call the play as an offensive coordinator, but if the head coach don't like it, it doesn't make it to the field.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think Ryan Day is going to be involved in that process no matter what. He already said yesterday, he was asked about kind of how he's dividing his time right now as head coach, and he said he's spending the majority of his time with the offense because of Brian Hartline being a first-time play caller, because of Julian Sayin being a first-time starting quarterback. So I do think that Ryan Day is probably from the jump going to have his hands on the process a little bit more this year than maybe he did last year with having an experienced offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly. I do think the plan is going to be for Brian Hartline to be the guy who's actually making that play call and calling it in. But I do think Ryan Day is going to be, heavily involved in that process, especially in this first game. And to your point, I think the question is, like, if things go bad early, is that leash going to tighten quickly and Ryan Day going to jump in and start making the calls himself? I don't really know the answer to that, but it's certainly something that I think we're going to be watching for.
Dan Hope of 11 Warriors joining us here to talk Texas, Ohio State. A couple more for you, Dan. Really appreciate your time this morning. I feel ridiculous asking this question, and maybe it is a ridiculous question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is 100% of the Ohio State fan base now in on Ryan Day? I know, going into the playoff last year, there were definitely some detractors, but what a run the Buckeyes went on, winning those 4 CFP games. And Texas was the only one that was even kind of close. Is everyone bought in on Ryan Day yet, or are there still some folks wondering if he's the right guy?
Well, 100% is a strong phrase. So I don't know if it's 100% because that Ohio State-Michigan game carries a lot of weight here in Columbus. And until he beats Michigan, I think there's always going to be some detractors there. But I think by and large, the vast majority of the Ohio State fan base is now very supportive of Ryan Day, thanks to that run last year.
That helps.
There you go.
What about, I want to ask you about Caleb Downs, Dan. I mean, he's awesome. We saw it firsthand in person back in January. You see all of these, preseason articles ranking all of the top players in college football, and you don't have to go too far down to find Caleb Downs' name. Just how good is he? What makes him so special, and what type of role do you think he's going to play in this game come Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just it's almost like if you kind of created like this perfect safety for the defense in a lab, I think he pretty much has pretty much everything you're looking for. I mean, he's got, tremendous football IQ. He's got, all the athletic traits you look for, and he can do so many different things. And I think in terms of his role, like that's something that Matt Patricia is going to take advantage of. I think you're going to see him move around the defense a lot. I mean, even just in a few camp practices we saw, one play he'd be lined up at free safety, but next play he's lined up at nickel, basically playing slot corner. So I think you're going to see him move around where he's, he could be playing basically linebacker at times. He could be playing basically slot corner at times. And then there's going to be other times he's playing more of a traditional deep safety role. And so I think they're going to take advantage of his talents and really build this defense around him. And he's going to kind of be the centerpiece of everything. There's a lot of guys who need to step up around him that are new starters on this Ohio State defense. But it does help a lot when you have a guy like Caleb Downs, who is in the middle of everything and can kind of bring stability to the entire defense.
Yeah, he's the guy who can still come off the edge as a secondary, guy who can blitz and make things happen. I mean, he can take a running back one-on-one and just get rid of him or go right by him. So that scares you a little bit when he's close to the line of scrimmage. You got to make sure that guy's going to go drop in coverage and not coming off the corner.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I think you think about this Ohio State team, obviously we saw Texas do it, defensively last year with the way it played Jeremiah Smith. Or I think you kind of have a player on each side of the ball, Jeremiah Smith on offense, Caleb Downs on defense. Yeah. You got to know where those guys are at all times. And if you can neutralize their impact on the game, you're going to have a better chance to win. But I think a lot of teams are going to go into this year saying, when Ohio State has the ball, we can't let number 4 take over the game. And when Ohio State is on defense, we can't let number 2 take over the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they've got to be trying to find a way to get the ball to the wide receiver. You can't have one catch in a game. They've been working on that since springtime, I got to believe.
Absolutely. I'm very interested to see what do they do this year to find ways to scheme Jeremiah Smith open, but I'd be shocked if he has only one catch again. I think he's too good for Ohio State not to find a way to get him more involved this year.
All right, Dan, before we let you go, we'd love to get maybe 1 or 2 keys to the game, but more importantly, your prediction. Number 1, Texas. Number 3, Ohio State. Number 2 in the coaches poll. Keys to the game, and who do you think comes out victorious Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with one, mentioned it before. I think, from Ohio State's perspective, that offensive line, particularly the offensive tackles, how do they hold up against the Texas pass rush? I think that's going to be very key, for Ohio State, especially with having a young quarterback in there. And then, just more specifically on the quarterbacks, I mean, on both sides, do these guys live up to the hype? And there's so much hype around both Arch Manning and Julian saying, but this is by far the biggest game either one of them will have played in their careers. And so, do those guys live up to the hype? Do we see a great, showdown between the two quarterbacks, or does this turn into more of a defensive battle? I tend to think that, this isn't going to be a super high scoring game because I think, both these defenses are really talented. Even with, all the guys that Ohio State is replacing on defense. But, my gut tells me, I think this is going to be a close game, but my gut tells me Texas is going to win this game. I think that they just have, a few more experienced returning players. They have a quarterback in Arch Manning who's, been the quarterback all off season, who has another year in that system, whereas Julian's kind of had to fight for that quarterback position all year and has only been in the system for 1 full year before this year. So I'm going to say Texas 27, Ohio State 24.
Well, you just made a lot of friends here in Austin, Dan. Love that. Hey, thanks for the time. Last thing, have you ever done an interview being stared down by a giant stuffed bear?
I think this is a first.
We like to have fun here. I promise it's not always like this.
Yeah, it's not. Let me ask you something quick before you go. Who in the Big Ten right now are you looking at as a surprise team that will come out of the Big Ten? Now, we know Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. Is there somebody else that you see that will really push some of the top-level teams in the Big Ten this year?
Yeah, I mean, I know they've gotten a lot of talk, so I don't know how much of a surprise they still are, but I think Illinois is going to be a team to watch this year. I think they could be, kind of an Indiana-like team from last year. They have, I think, like the second or third most returning starters in the country. They've got, a lot of really good experienced players. They won 10 games last year. And so I think they're a team that could contend for a college football playoff spot this year.
Interesting.
I like it. Dan, thanks so much for the time, man. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the game this weekend. And who knows, maybe there's a rematch in December and we'll get the chance to chop it up again with you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, guys.